Welcome to episode 98 of absolutely of Beer with Strangers. I'm your host, Tony Russo, and I'm joined this week once again by the world traveler, Doug Griffith.
Good afternoon, Tony, and thanks all for joining us. I'll give my normal weekly weather report. Sun, sun, sun. For those sunbathers, it's a wonderful day. It's supposed to be in the 80s to upper 80s today and throughout the weekend. And here's to everybody. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Summer is here finally.
Well, that's good. That's surprising. It's a little sweeter than I thought it was going to be. All sorts of things. I guess we'll start with this beer, but then we'll go to the brewing thing because we have a beer here, and sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. So what's the beer that we're drinking here?
Chateau Giajo. It's one of the ancient ale series from Dogfish that we've been collaborating with Patrick McGovern through Dogfish and coming up with homebrew recipes for his forthcoming book on ancient brews.
And are these already out, or are these?
These are not out yet. We're waiting for his book to be published, which sometime later this year. I haven't heard a final date yet, but we've been working on the recipes and gave him some samples so that he could see what we're dealing with and making sure that they're similar to what he thinks they should be compared to what Dogfish was brewing.
Now, here's a question, because to make them affordable, because I know some of these ingredients can be expensive. So is that part of what you were doing to try to take the price point down?
To get the price down as much as possible. One example I know is the Vazar, or KVSAR. Anyway, I can never pronounce the name. Vazar. But anyway, it called for birch syrup. So instead of us using birch syrup, we're using birch bark, ground birch bark, and adding some extra corn sugar to it to simulate the amount of carbohydrates or sugars you get from birch bark syrup. But you incorporated the birch bark itself, and it's not birch bark syrup; it'd be birch syrup, with maple syrup.
Right.
But, the birch bark is very similar in smell and flavor, so we're hoping that comes through enough. And it was only a small amount; it was 8 ounces in a 5-gallon batch, so it's not a tremendous amount. But we are trying to get those costs down. But some things you just can't get away from, such as lingonberries.
Right.
So that's one thing that's required, and I think they are a type of blueberry, but they're very specific.
Are they a little bit more bitter? Is that what they're
bitter? I think, and just the flavor is different than what blueberries or huckleberries would be.
I don't know if you remember. I remember you told me what the birch cost per ounce or something. It was like gold.
I think it's $9 for an 8-ounce container. And the only place we could find it was sourced out of Alaska. So shipping is horrible also.
So if you live in Alaska, then it's maybe a little bit. Yeah. Make your own.
And I'm sure there's other places that you can find birch syrup. I would imagine up through the Adirondacks, through New York, and maybe even up through Maine. Not only, I think in addition to the maple syrup or maple trees they have, I would think there'd be groves of birch trees that somebody probably is extracting the flavors from.
Go ahead. We have a guest. We'll continue. I'll continue talking, and then thanks. I will catch you later. So this is a live and working homebrew shop. So sometimes Doug gets called away. The story, which is really what we're here to talk about anyway, is about another recipe that's been kind of discovered, unearthed in China, and they say it's about 5,000 years old, and they have some of the ingredients, which is pretty cool. It's barley, it's still barley. But what I find is really interesting about it is that there's been a little bit of a debate for a while about why people chased after barley. And, there's a school that says people chased after barley because barley is what you make beer out of. And other people are like, oh, no, people chase after barley for bread. But increasingly, they're finding more evidence that people were using barley to ferment beer from a very early time. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, excuse me for a moment. If you're not familiar with the story, the way it goes is that people, the hypothesis, I guess, is people used to do to store barley in clay pots, and the best thought is that somebody forgot to keep a clay pot dry enough or didn't keep it dry enough. And it got filled with water, and they tasted the water, and it was sweet and it was alcoholic. And those were two things that people had never really had much experience with before. And from there, they started to stay and grow barley so that they can make this beer. And then they also made other foods out of it. And other people think the opposite, that they were making food out of barley, and then they also started trying to drink it. So this evidence in China from 5,000 years ago, and they had a brewing. If the story's on the website, but they had a brewing culture. This wasn't just a clay pot. This was something that they were making, and it was better than what normal people would drink. So they would have people come in and for dignitaries and things like this. This is what this particular beer would be for, as opposed to just like an everyday drink. It's compared here at the end. I'm sorry. The other reason the story caught my eye is because Patrick McGovern was consulted on it. And his final quote here, it says, it would have been an exotic ingredient that elites use to impress their friends and stay in power, much like when we serve up that 70,000 bottle of 1982 Petrus from Bordeaux today. Of course, by we, he means not me. I would love to taste a $70,000 bottle of wine, but that's probably not in the cards for me. But it is in the cards to have a better beer, because sometimes you just want to stop being thirsty and you just want to stop being hot. And other times you're like, I want something nice. And I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but you have a bottle of beer and you're not waiting for a special occasion so much as you're waiting for the right food. And the hope is that you'll have, like, I don't know, like even if I have something simple, even if I have a nice crisp pale ale, I want to wait for something that's with a little spice, something, I want to start a little fire to let that pale ale cool the fire down for me. So I think that's the difference between this beer and the other beers. And although when Doug is joining us now, again, for those of you who cannot see, but I just gave a quick history of the beer. But what I wanted to get back to with you was what it takes for Patrick to kind of tease these, because Patrick and Sam kind of tease these out as well. Yeah, what's that process like?
They take some of the dredges or what's left in some of the vessels. I mean, I know from when they had the King Midas,
right?
They had vessels, bronze vessels that were found in the tomb. Now, that said, they don't know if it was actually King Midas or it may have been his father. That's who they really suspect. But anyway, the beer that was produced and probably buried with him and his descendants, or some of the. Anyway, there's a bunch of people that were buried.
As don't
know
do.
If ever dead, but anyway,
right.
But
they were dead when they found them.
Yeah, long ago. But anyway, there were remnants of a beverage in the bottom of this bronze container. So they scooped this up at some point in time after it was discovered, and he said it was actually stored. The shortest archaeologist dig that he's gone on, it was stored at the University of Pennsylvania, like 2 floors above where he normally sits.
Oh, wow.
So he found out about it, went up, pulled a sample, and had it analyzed. So from that bio or molecular construction, they kind of determine what the components were and then recreate it from that. So going back to even what we were talking about with the Vassar, with the birch syrup or birch bark that's been extracted. I think it's close. I don't know what differences would be if you look at a molecular level. The birch is probably in
just
there,
more dried out. Yeah, just less sugar. So it's birch
anyway, yes,
and sugar.
We're trying to incorporate as much as we can into the actual ingredients that was discovered in the original.
I'm looking forward to that. We should do a big thing when you have the first couple come out. We should make a big deal about that, because that'll be fun. It's fun to drink these beers. Now, honey was apparently just because it was easy to get the sugar from. Is that, or do you think it was a crossover from mead, or?
Well, I think it is a crossover from mead, but there's three things that a lot of these ancient ales have associated with: some kind of grain,
right,
honey, and grapes or grape juice. So it was things that were sugar sources that readily available, and they used what was available. So.
It's funny how the mind works. I was having a sip of it when you said the word grape, and that made the grape flavor pop more. I'm like, oh yes, this tastes just like grapes.
Yeah. There's a mixture of that, and a lot of the ancient ales have some of those characteristics. May not have all three, but most of them have some kind of a barley based. And I know Dogfish has had to, for legal reasons, has to, I think, have 50% or 51% of the beer to be
right
barley in order that they can legally sell it as a beer,
and not like a malt liquor or
right. So if it was somebody else, possibly a winery, the proportions may be different, but the ingredients are in there of what was in the original, and I'm not sure they can even tell what the proportions are from their original brew.
Yeah, right. You just have to know enough about how, like, tastes haven't changed that much. Like if you want to make something taste good, you're gonna say, well, these proportions don't taste as good as these other proportions, and that's how you figure out.
And probably for a king or the descendants or the father of the king, they're going to use the best ingredients that they possibly had available.
Right. So. And it would be bolder and sweeter, right, and as palatable as palatable as it could be made. So,
but it's probably a good representation of what would have been used. At least like you said, it's been bolder taste because they probably used more in that for the king than what they would have used for the common man. So,
I'm sorry, I'm clicking here on the Bon Appetit link to see what Job's. Oh, there you go. They almost look like the Job's tears look almost like
barley corns or barley pearls,
black-eyed peas or something. These are these barley pearls. That's what they're called. Japanese Asian barley pearls, I believe they're called. But and that we'll have that up on the site as well. But it's cool. So you know what they look a little bit like? They look like the sweet cereal. There's a sweet cereal, wheat puffs or something.
Oh yeah, it's wheat or puff rice.
Right. Yeah. It's got that puff kind
wheat,
of.
Yep.
It's got that kind of. Yes. Got that kind of look. So that's the old stuff. And now to the new stuff. We skipped. We were just drinking beer in front of you, so we wanted to tell you why.
Cheers.
And now we'll tell you why we'll be drinking beer in front of you again on Saturday. So Saturday, May 28th. There's going to be an all grain brew day here at Extreme.
Yes.
And
we've got a customer who is very enthused about his grain father. It's a brewing solution for doing all grain batches. It's not a complete inclusive piece of equipment. You still need a hot liquor tank or a hot water tank. You still need to provide hot water for the sparging operation. But other than that, and you can use any size pot that will give you probably about 5 gallons of hot water for your sparging operation. But all the rest of it is done in the grain father. The mashing and the boiling is all done in the grain father equipment. So we're going to be demonstrating that starting at noon on Saturday, and we anticipate running about 4 to 4.5 hours.
I know. I did a little story on it this week, and I actually have you brewed on this yourself? Or?
No, I have not. We've got, there's videos out there for grain father, and you can find them on our site under the grain father information. But it's pretty interesting. I'd like to see what it looks like in person.
Yeah, and so one of the other things that he was talking about, because actually he was a guest a couple weeks ago. He came in to pick up some stuff while Sean and I were on, and he came and he talked a little bit. But one of the things that he mentioned afterwards and off the air was that he's also invented a kind of apparatus that'll heat the water in the to get the water up faster. Oh. So it gets the water hotter faster, and then you can level it up.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's anything to shorten your brew day.
Yeah, and so he I think he said something absurd, like he saves 23 minutes per gallon or something, something very nerdy like that. But there'll be food and there'll be beer. And while you're not, you probably oughtn't buy a grain father for your first for your first brew, because as Sean explained, you could just use a pot if you get,
well, for the extract
brews.
But that same pot that you could buy for your extract brews could be used later on for your grandfather brews,
right?
And heating that hot water up.
And so you should, even if you're not an accomplished brewer, you should come out and just see. Because for me, what's always cool about it is how everybody hangs out and how everybody gets along, and it's just a really communal kind of place when you come for these brew days, and even on regular, like come on a Saturday and there are just 10 guys hanging around, talking about brewing.
Yeah, it's a great source. You get perspectives on how other people brew. It may enlighten you as to the process or something that you've had questions about. It's a good place to ask those questions, and you get multiple answers. And there's no right or wrong for a lot of these things. It's just perspective, and what works for one person may work for another or may not work. It's all dependent upon what equipment you have and how you use that equipment.
Right. But just one of the things that's always cool for me is when you hear somebody discover that they're not the first one to make this mistake, or,
and Mike is a microbiologist, so he's very knowledgeable of yeast and the process of how it performs. So
that was really cool. Hopefully we're going to get to taste some of his beer he made with freshly captured yeast. He captured his own yeast that he might get to name or whatever. It's a yeast that nobody's ever used before. So we're looking forward to all of that. Also, I'll be here. I'll be signing my books. And I'll be talking about beer. If you want to talk to me about the history of beer rather than the brewing of beer, we can do that. I figure we can hang around during the excuse me. I just got a commercial. Sorry, you'll hear it on online. I don't think you'll hear it on the podcast, but I just rolled over, I guess, a commercial in our next story. And so our next story is about the.
I just wanted to point out that you're becoming the foremost author on Eastern Shore.
Yeah, beer.
Delmarva beer, I should say.
Yes, I am. I have, only because I have both states. I have 2 books. I have both states, and it's cool. I've had some success. I've had some, a little couple 3 failures. I was up at Blue World, which we already talked about. I hopefully would do very well here. I think they want to do something big at Mississippian. Wants me to come to actually one of the homebrew nights.
Okay.
So that would be fun. And then of course, I'd like to do something at Third Wave, but I might wait until the season dies down a little bit and it's a little bit less kooky. I don't know. I'm not in any rush, but
you have plenty of time.
Yeah, time is my ally. So that story's dead. My internet just froze. Let's make sure we're not looking at a frozen picture of us online. Hello?
Still moving.
We're still moving. Okay. We're just gonna have to remember the rest of the stories. So we'll do 2 more stories because I can't remember this evolution of a hobby, which is just about how people started homebrewing. Like started having home brewing clubs, but we'll have that up. You can read it. It's from Beer Advocate. Beer Advocate sometimes is a little nerdy for me, is one of the things I did want to point out. And that's fine. They do what they do and I do what I do. I do like the opposite of them. I talk more about the culture. They talk more about the life, let's say. But this is a really, really good article from them, and it's really accessible. You don't have to be accessible. You don't have to be super into beer to get it, which is not something. Their articles are for people who are crazy.
What you're talking about?
Well, actually, that's this story we're not going to do because I can't read it anymore. Okay. But no, this was not nerdy at all. This is stuff we talk about all the time. And so, in a recent story from the Chicago Tribune, and that one's gone too. Sam Calagione and hello, hi. Patty's joining us. That's all right. I'm on it. We'll talk about the last story, and then we'll talk about this when we come back, because Doug has more to say about it than I do. And the story's back. So you got it?
Yep.
All right. That was quick. It's a working facility, kids. So I couldn't remember the other guys' names. I know it's not. It's the guy from Stone who is Coke, and then Sam. And then
Greg.
There you go. Greg Koch, and then Bill Kowaleski. He was the one I had trouble remember. Of Victory. And so they sat the three of them down, and they were talking about beer culture and what we just kind of went over it. But what were some of the highlights of this one?
I think it's a lot of the last years of the podcast. One of the biggest things is when you sit down at a place and ask for a beer, you don't really know whose beer you're getting. It may be one of the big guys or maybe craft brew, but with a lot of the smaller breweries by InBev or Budweiser, I think the biggest example of what the story talked about was going to an airport and they had 7 IPAs on tap, and all of them were Budweiser.
Right, and that was the airport that the interview was taking place in.
So you don't really know whose beer you're drinking. You may think you're getting one of the small craft beers. You're paying premium price, but you're not getting a true, I would consider a true premium. Now, if you like it, that's fine. But, I'd like to know whose beer I actually am drinking.
Especially, and one of the things that Sam brought out is he's like, he understands that it gets exhausting for civilians. Like normal people don't want to make too big of a deal out of it. They just want to find a beer they like and drink it. But one of the things that that craft beer always relied on was being able to offer diversity and being able to offer different flavors. And so now what they're trying to offer better is like a personal relationship and just a story that goes with the beer, so that that the beer came from someone who